So welcome everyone. My name's Helen Signey and I'm the Science Communications Advisor to SERI, which, as you've heard before, is a collaboration between the Australian Prevention Partnership Centre and currently 10 centres of research excellence. So we represent more than 200 senior prevention researchers across Australia. The name of this workshop today is Essential Communication Tips for Research, Policy and Practice. The aim of it is to teach you just the basics of what you need to know in your work about communications. So it's going to cover why comms is important, how to identify your audiences and how to reach them with effective key messages. The workshop is led by Helen Gray, who's a highly experienced communication strategist, storyteller, and relationship builder. Helen's worked in Australia and overseas for organisations including the CSIRO, TAFE Queensland, and currently the School of Public Health at the University of Queensland. She manages communications for the Australian Longitudinal Study on Women's Health, as well as the NHMRC Centre of Research Excellence on Women and Non-Communicable Diseases. During the session, we're going to be breaking out a couple of times into small groups. You'll see in the chat there are some resources to use in the breakout sessions, and those were also available when you clicked on, but let us know if you have any trouble opening them or accessing them. The breakout rooms are being facilitated by a group of experienced comms professionals. So we're very pleased to be joined by Ainsley Burgess, Cindy Jones and myself from the Prevention Centre, and Concita Kaswara from Epoch Translate CRE. So that's enough from me. Now, without further ado, over to you, Helen.
Thank you, Helen. Okay. Right. I'd like to start with an acknowledgement of country. So the Collaboration for Enhanced Research Impact acknowledges Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the first Australians and the traditional custodians of the land where we live, learn and work. And in addition, I guess I pay my respects to the Turrbal and Yagara elders past, present and emerging, who are the traditional custodians in Brisbane where I live and work. Now, on with the show. So why are communication skills important? Well, we are going to start with a story. And this one's an origin story. Why are you here? Once upon a time, a long time ago, and maybe a long way away, there was a young, impressionable child who decided that they were going to save the world with science. Now that child grew up, they studied hard, they went to university, they did a PhD. And they started to publish papers, good papers, important papers. But the world still needed saving, and they started to worry that maybe those papers weren't being read. And if they were being read, then who was reading them? Surely not the politicians or the policymakers or the practitioners. I mean, after all, who's got time to wade through all those statistics, get to the point already. But the world still needed saving. There were questions to be answered and problems to be solved, and they needed grant money to do that. Lots of grant money. But it seems that times are changing and it's not enough to publish papers. In exchange for grant money, the funding bodies want assurance that our researcher has a plan to get to the politicians and the policymakers and the practitioners and get their research into use. So, money sorted. Just when you finally thought you could get back to saving the world, someone turns up from the university and they need an impact summary for the ARC engagement and impact assessment. And the funders need a mid-year report. The media team wants a lay summary and a tweet. Someone from one of your consumer groups wants an infographic for the annual report. And you can't even get your granny to understand the grand plan to save the world. So where do you even start? I'm hoping that some part of this scenario is familiar to you, and if you're one of our attendees who's in the policy role, swap yourselves into someone else's shoes for a moment, and you may still find, I hope, that some of this rings true. So where are we going to start? We are going to start with a strategic communication plan. So we'll spend the next hour working through an approach to communicating strategically. We'll break out into smaller groups. And we're going to look at a paper, a project, perhaps a program that you're working on, and we'll define your communication objectives. We'll identify your audience, The biggest part of this session is going to be spent unpacking the content box. So that's your messages, call to action, the story, the format that you eventually choose to go with. And we're going to wrap up by talking about dissemination, distributing your message. So the great thing about this style of plan is that you can use it for practically any type of communication, big broad advocacy level to talk about issues and really get politicians and policymakers and user groups talking. Project level to get buy-in, you can use it to start translating results. If you're working on participant recruitment, this is the same sort of thing that you'll be doing here. Or again, if you've been asked by someone in your university marketing team to create something, work backwards, fill in the blanks, and make sure that it's meeting your objectives. So I like to put the communication planning into the context of a project's impact pathway, because it's something that you're going to be able to use and reuse at various points and stages along the pathway, recycle the elements. So to judge how much time we spend on the next section, just pop a quick message into the chat box. Are you familiar with the idea of the impact pathway? Is it something that you have to use sort of in your planning every day? Anybody? Okay. That's a lot of no's. Okay. Here we go then. So what is research impact? Every organisation out there has a slightly different definition, but it all comes down to demonstrating a tangible change beyond academia. I'll let you read these in your own time. The one that I like is from NHMRC because it talks about impact made to knowledge, health, the economy, and/or society, and also the impact of not doing something, which is really important if perhaps you're assessing risks or benefits, cost benefits, that kind of thing. So there is really this big culture shift, and I think I'm noticing it at UQ where I work, University of Queensland. At a corporate level, it's been talked about a lot, but at the research level, it's really still just sort of slowly percolating through that this is something that we need to do and how to do it. So the culture shift is ongoing. I think it's fabulous. It's really not enough just to publish and have things sitting in a journal gathering dust. I know people get really defensive if I say that, but you need to show value in that your work is valuable. But it leaves researchers with a lot of extra work. So in the context of communication, who you're communicating with, what are the opportunities to reuse the content that we're doing today? Here is, in brief, the impact pathway. So first step is input. This is refining the question. It's resourcing. So your financial resources, human resources, materials, knowledge. And at this point, communication-wise, you're looking at 30-second pitches, 200-word summaries. And it's really about getting people on board, co-production, consumer involvement, reference groups, stakeholder engagements. As we go through this, I think it'll really start to show you how important it is to communicate with these groups before you get to the translation end. All right, activities. I think everyone's fairly familiar with this. This is the methodology, the research part, but you might also be looking at writing surveys. You're going to be writing instructions for things, reports, summaries. If you're recruiting actual participants, there's a lot of communication work that goes into talking to people and making sure that they really understand what your message is and what you need of them. Next up in the pathway is outputs. And I think most people are familiar with the traditional outputs. So your papers, presentations, posters, reports. Non-traditional outputs are things like policy briefs, plain English summaries, videos, media releases, web pages, interpretive dance. There is a fabulous PhD competition where people actually retell their PhDs in interpretive dance and song. Check it out on YouTube. It's well worth it. Okay, so I think that's sort of the non-traditional stuff is where people start to get a little bit stressed about how do I produce this and who am I talking to? So we'll cover some of the techniques for getting into that. All right, dissemination. So I don't think I've ever seen an official impact pathway that includes dissemination as a broken out point. And I think usually communication is buried in the outputs box. Communication is just, it's one of those things, it happens. But burying it down there does us a disservice because it diminishes the importance and the effort involved in communications activities. And there's a really important distinction that I think gets missed, and that is that your outputs are things. You have a brief, you have a PowerPoint, you have a report. Communication is an action. You give a presentation, you speak at emails, you speak at meetings, and you send your emails and you distribute your newsletters. So it's something you have to work hard at. And you have to be strategic. So, it doesn't just mean, okay, I've made a thing and I'm going to whack it up on my CRC Uni website. I'm going to tweet it from an account that only my sister follows. It's really not worth the effort if that's all you're going to do with it. So we're going to talk about how things here can be done, hopefully on a relative budget. What I will say is that next time you go to a grant proposal, and I beg you, build some kind of knowledge sharing or dissemination into your grant applications, and think about things like writers and graphic designers and paid promotion on social media. Because I deal with a lot of people who are like, oh, but we don't have the money to do that. And what it means is that you have to do a lot of hard legwork to get the same effect. All right, from dissemination, we get to outcomes. And this is, in various definitions, it's called uptake, sometimes it's called translation. So this is where you sort of lose control of things, and your research as a researcher is cited in reports, taken up into policy development, clinical guidelines, tools. Even if you talk about, say, your media release being taken up by the media and published, that's outcomes. So you might not be communicating, but what you need to be doing at this point is recording every single thing that happens down the track. Your universities or your grant applications are going to need to know what sort of impact you've had. And in the short term, you'll be talking about the views things got, how many impressions something got on social media, did it get shared, how many emails did you send, how many meetings did you go to, all the sort of things that go on in the background leading up to something ending up in a policy guideline. Because, at the end of it, your work may not get cited in that document, but you certainly know that you did 50 different meetings and a bunch of webinars to get there. Okay, and finally, 5 to 10 years down the track, ta-da, impact. And it's really worth noting here that impact is considered to be 5 years minimum from the end of a project before you can start to show this change to society. So if you think about it in terms of, how long does it take to commercialize a new drug, or how long between editions of clinical guidelines, that's why there is that gap. The process just takes a while. But once you've been tracking your outcomes and your dissemination, you can start to see it. So the more you do, the more there is to track, the more chance there is of your work being taken up and being impactful. And it cycles back to the more chance there is of you getting the next grant and moving on with research and back to saving the world. So in a nutshell, that's research impact. Now, outlining your objectives. I'm going to get into the nitty gritty. So, yes, a podcast is cool, but your resources are limited. So your objectives are going to help you decide if doing this thing is going to help you further your goals. So what do you want to achieve? You can be there to enhance your professional image, raise awareness. Maybe this is about raising awareness of the program, of your university, of yourself. Your objective could just be to amplify, to get people to share this message. You could be informing, educating, motivating, or persuading, trying to influence people, building relationships, generating demand for a product or a service that you have. And the final one I've got here is behavior change, because this is bottom of the list, hardest to achieve it all. And there's multiple stages to get there. The other thing that you need to think about is, what do you want your audience to do after they've read or watched or listened to your communication? And we'll get to this in the messaging context later. So once you've got your objectives, you're going to move on and identify your audience. So we're going to work through a quick exercise here in identifying your audience. We're going to talk about tailoring your communication to the audience once you've found them. Now, this gem popped up in my socials recently. I'm only responsible for what I say, not for what you understand. And this attitude makes my blood boil, because it takes a lot of effort as a communicator, I guess, to reach your audience and to really try to make them understand. You are absolutely responsible for trying to make them understand. So how do we get people to understand what we're trying to say? We look at values-based communication, and we're going to walk through what I talk about as the care factor. All right, so first up, finding your audience. So I'm going to start with an example on the CRA Wand publication list. It's the associations between feeding practices in infancy and fruit and vegetable consumption in childhood by Dr. Katrina Moss and team. So they recommended the government recommended first food for babies is this really bland rice cereal. It's been the same thing for, I don't know, probably 50 years. Katrina and her team found that children who ate fruit or veggies first instead of the cereal had a bigger variety of veggies in their diet, and they ate fruit and vegetables more frequently. Brilliant. Okay, so who should know about this? The usual response is everyone. But we have limited resources, so we'll try and narrow it down. What are our objectives? Well, we want to see this finding integrated into policy, and we do want everyone to be aware of it and to change their child feeding practices. So who are the end users that are going to benefit from this research? Because that's going to help us narrow it. And yes, perhaps in the end, everyone will benefit, but in the short term, children, okay? How do you reach children? Via their parents. Probably new mums. There is a breastfeeding component to this story as well. Now, if we pitched a media release, we might have got on the news. Some of those women might hear about our really important research, and then it just sort of disappears off into the other, and everybody kind of forgets about that one. So let's be strategic. Who can we get to help us get in touch with new parents? And what about the guidelines? Okay, so we're moving from the end user, taking a step back and looking instead at the next user of our research. And these are the people who are best able to take your research and run with it. This is where your outputs are going to become outcomes. So the uptake, the translation, or even just people who've got really good channels in to talk to your end users. So we can break it down into policymakers, specifically who is writing the guidelines. We need to be in touch with them. Are there advocacy and support organisations who are in touch with the new parents? Absolutely. There's government parenting programs. There's a million and one support programs for parents out there. All great people, and they've all got their Facebook groups and their newsletters and their own distribution mechanisms that we need to piggyback on. All right, what about the industry organisations? So there's RANZCOG, RACGP, the nutritionists and midwives. What are our options for reaching those organisations who then reach the individual health workers who can then pass that message on? All right, so now that we've identified our audience, this is going to help us make decisions about the communication activities. And when we break out into the workshop, where you're going to run through this activity yourself and figure out who your audience is. So identify it. Now we're going to start tailoring it. So what tone's appropriate? Is it informative? Is it helpful? Is it a policy brief that's very formal? Okay, what does my audience already know about this topic? How much context should I give? I would say if you're writing for the general public, you need to be explaining quite a lot, generally. Do they understand specialist terms and technical jargon? You would be amazed at, I guess, the words that have become entrenched in your everyday use that people don't understand. So I came into women's health 5 years ago, and up until that point, I knew that I'd had a first period. I'd never heard the word menarche. And since then, I catch doctors and obstetricians saying it. I'm like, you've got to stop. Nobody knows what you're talking about. They're just nodding and smiling. So it's really important to break it down. So it's some of the words that we've, cardiovascular health. Okay, that's your heart health. Things like that, put it in brackets if you're unsure. Okay. Will people understand the implications of my research? And I know we've got probably some policy people in the listening in, and I've found, don't be offended by my next little anecdote. I've found that people working in health tend to have a fairly good health background. I've also worked in, a long time ago, clean coal technology, where I found that people really didn't know what was going on. So way back when I was at CSIRO, awesome job, wonderful people, saving the world through clean coal technology. And so I was less than a year into the job, giving a site tour to the Federal Minister for Energy and his advisors. And, one of these advisors dropped back and he was absolutely grilling me on these topics as we're going through this site tour. And I'm sort of starting to feel like an absolute fraud, until he fessed up that the week before he'd been working in the Department of Main Roads. He had no idea, really what any of this was about, but he was expected to be providing solid advice on it. And so I think, whatever you're doing, whoever you're working with, you always need to pull out what's the implication of this. Is it an implication for policy? You need to be upfront on across what the current policies are. Is it an implication for practitioners? What should women be doing, or men, or the general public? Okay. Now, the other question I get asked a lot is, do people need or want to know about my methodology? Generally not as much as you do. And what are their core values? So let's hone in on values-based communication for a moment. Why appeal to values? Well, first off, it's going to help you frame something sort of in terms of, it can make a topic engaging, and it can really take someone from feeling defensive about something to seeing a common ground. And so one of the biggest examples out there at the moment is climate change. And it's really gone from this really environmental perspective, threatens our existence, to framing it around the economy. How can we get people to take action? Let's start to think about the money and the risk. And I think one of the things that we're seeing in health prevention is where health prevention messages and health economics sort of go hand in hand with a lot of this too. All right, why else appeal to values? So this is Shalom Schwartz's list of 68 values that are considered universal. Don't freak out about the diagram. There's no need to memorize it. It's really here as a bit of a prompt. As we'll see, because values motivate our actions. So you can see we've got, we're motivated towards achievement or power or security, wealth. Those are the things that motivate us inherently. So, the one thing I'll say is wealth and power and security are all very strong motivators. And I guess they're your more conservative things. Now they are actually sort of, I guess it's a desire to reduce anxiety. So you have anxiety about losing these things, you're trying to protect them. So they're not necessarily, being into wealth is not necessarily a negative thing. You're about protecting what you have. All right, values are linked to emotion. And this one is really, really important because most of us make decisions based on emotion rather than facts. Really quickly, and then we'll cherry pick the facts later to suit our internal narrative and our values. And the other thing is that these values often guide our evaluation. So is something worth the investment? Do we trust that person? And this is, again, quite often completely subconscious. All right, the care factor. I'm going to hand over to a chap called Sinek to talk about the care factor. He's a motivational speaker who gave a TED talk way back in 2009. So you're going to have to forgive the video quality, but it's on the topic of why should I care? And his particular little video, we're just going to watch a short segment, has a marketing focus. But that's actually what we're doing today. We're marketing your research or your program or your message. So let's hear about the care factor.
How do you explain when things don't go as we assume? Or better, how do you explain when others are able to achieve things that seem to defy all of the assumptions?
Oops, I apologize.
For example, why is Apple so innovative? Year after year after year after year, they're more innovative than all their competition. And yet they're just a computer company. They're just like everyone else. They have the same access to the same talent, the same agencies, the same consultants, the same media. Then why is it that they seem to have something different? Why is it that Martin Luther King led the civil rights movement? He wasn't the only man who suffered in a pre-civil rights America, and he certainly wasn't the only great orator of the day. Why him? And why is it that the Wright brothers were able to figure out controlled powered manned flight when there were certainly other teams who were better qualified, better funded, and they didn't achieve powered manned flight, and the Wright brothers beat them to it. There's something else at play here. Why, how, what? This little idea explains why some organizations and some leaders are able to inspire where others aren't. Let me define the terms really quickly. Every single person, every single organization on the planet knows what they do, 100%. Some know how they do it, whether you call it your differentiating value proposition or your proprietary process or your USP. But very, very few people or organizations know why they do what they do. And by why, I don't mean to make a profit. That's a result. It's always a result. By why, I mean what's your purpose? What's your cause? What's your belief? Why does your organization exist? Why do you get out of bed in the morning? And why should anyone care? Well, as a result, the way we think, the way we act, the way we communicate is from the outside in. It's obvious. We go from the clearest thing to the fuzziest thing. But the inspired leaders and the inspired organizations, regardless of their size, regardless of their industry, all think, act, and communicate from the inside out. Let me give you an example. I use Apple because they're easy to understand and everybody gets it. If Apple were like everyone else, a marketing message from them might sound like this. We make great computers. They're beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. Want to buy one? Meh. And that's how most of us communicate. That's how most marketing is done, that's how most sales is done, and that's how most of us communicate interpersonally. We say what we do, we say how we're different or how we're better, and we expect some sort of behavior, a purchase, a vote, something like that. Here's our new law firm. We have the best lawyers with the biggest clients. We have, we always perform for our clients, do business with us. Here's our new car. It gets great gas mileage. It has, leather seats. Buy our car. But it's uninspiring. Here's how Apple actually communicates. Everything we do, we believe in challenging the status quo. We believe in thinking differently. The way we challenge the status quo is by making our products beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. We just happen to make great computers. Want to buy one? Totally different, right? You're ready to buy a computer from me. All I did was reverse the order of the information. What it proves to us is that people don't buy what you do, people buy why you do it. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. This explains why every single person in this room is perfectly comfortable buying a computer from Apple. But we're also perfectly comfortable buying an MP3 player from Apple, or a phone from Apple, or a DVR from Apple. But as I said...
Okay, we'll leave Simon there. But I think the point is very valid, and I think to explain exactly how important this care factor is in getting your message out, if you're going to pitch for the conversation, the first thing that they ask as your pitch is 50 words, why should we care? And then 100 words for your supporting points. So how do you find your care factor? Remember this girl? Why did you care about this topic so passionately to start with? If you've got a personal experience that drove your passion, don't be afraid to share it with people. It really helps to engage people and bring them on board. You also don't have to. I mean, maybe you're just doing it because your supervisor thought it would be great and that's how you got into it. So why should someone else care? And this is where you have to start looking at what are the values that you can tap into with them? What are the benefits to them? And what's the potential impact to them? Now, very soon, we're going to break out into our groups, and you should have 3 different worksheets downloadable from the chat box. One of them is going to be this graph, and you don't necessarily have to work on, this table. We won't necessarily be working on that, but it's something that you can take home and fill in as you go. So it's the quick at-a-glance version. We're going to be doing the first 3 columns. You're going to identify your audience, the end user and the next users. So in our example about the baby food, end users, new parents, where do they get their information? Government programs, websites, parenting groups, for the midwives, pediatricians, online news. Okay, what's our objective to say talking to parenting groups? We want them to amplify and share our message. We want to inform people through the news. But then some of these groups, they're our next users. So okay, the websites, we want them to amplify, the pediatricians, how are we going to get to them? Through the Australian Paediatric Society newsletters. The GPs, maybe through RAC GP News, methods like that. So we'll work through who our audience is, where do they get their information, and what are the communication objectives. So there's a Word document which we'll pull up, and that's going to have all of the points that we've just covered in the last section of the presentation to help you sort of work your way through it with your facilitators. So we'll see you back here in 20 minutes to talk about your projects and programs and find out who you're talking to.
Did we, sorry, Ellen, did we want to still come back at 2:40 or did we want to push that out a little bit, take a little time from the later one? Just running a little
I think if we make it 2:45.
2:45? No worries at all. Excellent.
Helen, are we working individually or as groups, or how are we going to work this out?
I think with your facilitator, the idea is that you'll work on your own project and just talk back to your group. So you'll be in a group to ask questions and share your information, but thinking about your own project.
I don't think I have a facilitator because I couldn't even get onto the networking site during the morning session. I couldn't join.
Let's see. I think we're just waiting to go into the
won't be too
breakout
much
groups.
longer.
And Sally, yes, the doc's at the beginning of the chat. Can you see it, or shall we pop them back in?
Can't see them.
Okay. Ainsley, can you pop the documents back through the chat before we break out?
Yeah, doing it now.
Here we go.
Excellent.
So this first Word document is the one that we'll be working on in the quick breakout.
Perfect. And are we ready to go into those breakouts? Excellent.
Oi! Oi! Lola!
Oh, I think you're on mute, Ellen.
I'm on mute, the classic. Okay, can everyone still see my screen? Do I need to reshare?
I think you'll need to reshare.
Okay. Screen. Two more screens. Okay, we should be back. All right. So before we go too much further, does anyone want to have a quick share perhaps what they came up with in the breakout? And it was a very quick chance. You can pop your hand up and type something in. I know we didn't get around to everyone quite as well. It might be easier if you just unmute and have a chat if you do want to share, rather than trying to type a big spiel in. But
so we had an interesting example in our group about trying to engage parents to attend preschool and playgroup when they're not really engaged with any system already. So some communities who maybe don't want to have any engagement with government, and we were sort of very quickly talking about how you need really bespoke communications plans for hard to reach communities like that. I don't know if you want to, I can't see everybody who's in here. I don't know if you want to expand on that a bit.
Hi, Jackie here. I was in that group in terms of the playgroup example, and just talking about how it's difficult to come up with a communication strategy when, well, not difficult, but when there's lots of different target groups that you're trying to engage, and there are different reasons why they're not engaging with the playgroups. And so just trying to recognise that in the strategy or plan that you develop.
Yeah, and I guess sometimes you have to recognize that you're going to have a different audience, and each audience will have a different objective and a slightly different message. And it's just copy and paste and repeat for each audience. It would be great if we could send, one media release out there and that fitted everyone, but the reality is that it usually doesn't. And the work gets quite repetitive and time consuming as you get down into these harder and harder to reach groups. So, you do have to make sure that the value is there in that effort as well. That's why we're here. So, all right, I think we've lost a little bit of time getting through. So we'll push on through and get into, trying to get my slides to work. Here we go. The content. How do you actually decide what you're going to say once you've decided who your audience is? So we're going to talk about key messages, what's called in marketing terms a call to action, choosing your format, and a quick look at communicating through storytelling. All right, so with key messages, a lot of people want to jump straight to the main finding as the message. There's an 86% increased risk of blah, blah, blah. What I like to do is step back to what's called the house model of messaging. So you have an overarching message forms the roof, and this is very often not necessarily your finding, but it's related to your objectives. The supporting messages, they might be your main finding, and I advise to go easy on the statistics at this point, but they should also address benefits or value for the audience. If there's barriers or objections, you might need to include a rebuttal here. And then finally, the foundations are going to be the evidence. That's your facts and figures, anecdotes, case studies, that sort of thing. So if we go back to our baby food example and look at the general public as an audience, the overarching message could be give babies fruit and vegetables for their first food, not cereal. Simple, to the point. Supporting messages then go into the why. So because getting kids to eat veggies is a struggle, and less than 5% of children eat the recommended fruits and veggies. And then your next point might be that babies that eat fruit and veggies first compared to cereal end up eating a wider variety of veggies and more veggies by the time they're 5 to 12 years old. And then we go into the evidence where we can talk about the statistics and what happens if you're breastfeeding versus not breastfeeding, and some of the more nuanced information that we have. So the call to action A lot of people sort of get a bit of a blank look when I start talking about this, but it tells the audience what to do next. It's going to support your objectives and make sure that your audience goes out and tries to do something. So you could put the call to action in your overarching message. It could be in one of your key messages. It should always be embedded in a conclusion. And you know, it could even be, if it's something very short, just a clickable button, read more, register, take our survey, something really simple. So again, you know, if we look at our pitch to the conversation for the nutrition piece, our call to action is going to be, we need to change infant feeding guidelines. If we're doing a social media post, the call to action might be, you know, start with veggies, or click to learn more if you want to educate people about why they should be doing this. Maybe you've just emailed someone, and I would say, you know, don't just attach your PDF and leave it with them. You really need to, you know, finish up that email, and it seems like common sense, but finish it up with a request that they forward it to their colleagues, or an invitation to call you with questions and meet. It's something as simple as that, but it's just that mental checklist reminder to make sure that that's in there every time. Now, choosing a format, and what does your audience, you know, read, watch, or listen to? And you need to really make sure that you choose a format because it appeals to your audience, not because it appeals to your director, not because it's flavor of the day, or it's easy to do. So I've spent years sort of building up the self-confidence to tell my supervisors that, you know what, the video is cool, but not for this audience and not for this message. So you need to think about where your audience is going to get their information from. Is it social media, community leaders, you know, social media influencers, someone like that? Are they looking at things that are long or short, text or video? You know, they're time poor. So are they going to read a full article, or do you need to, you know, give them the top 5 list of what to do? And once you've done that, you know, the interpretive dance, PDFs, webinars, then you can decide how you're going to fit all of this in. When you do choose a format, you need to think about barriers to communication. Attention span is a big one. Will someone read a 300-page report? Not unless they're really into it. You spent 10K on producing a video. Are they going to watch it? In the right setting, yes. But as an example, videos on Facebook, 30% of 30-second videos are viewed to the end. If you up that time to 1 minute, less than 5% are viewed all the way to the end. So you need to make your message short and sharp and to the point. And you also need to have it in the right place for people to really want to look at it. Language is a big consideration. Obviously, if you're dealing with people whose English is a second language, you need to be considering if there is, I guess, language that is perhaps going to trigger people, or slang that you need to be aware of. And the other big thing is literacy, especially if you're talking to the general public. 1 in 5 Australians have a literacy level that's known as functional literacy. So they're below a grade 9 level. They probably can't read a medicine bottle. They might struggle to read online instructions. They're definitely struggling with Centrelink forms. So one of the things, just as a quick tip, if you are creating documents for the general public, have a look through Microsoft Word. Somewhere buried in the tools in there is something called the Flesch-Kincaid readability score. And that will help you to keep your sentences shorter, use simpler words, and modify what you're doing for a broader audience, shall we say. All right, when you're choosing a format, you also have to think about the design requirements. This could be an entire workshop in itself. Accessibility is an issue. If you're creating something for the government, you have to be aware of vision and hearing and physical access requirements. If you're creating something for men, 1 in 10 are colorblind, so check the colors that you're putting in your PDF and graphics. It doesn't need to work on a mobile versus a desktop. What about the download size? The first version of this presentation that I tried to email, Outlook flat out rejected it because it was too big. Do you have the resources internally to do this? And that doesn't just mean the money to create something, but do you have the skill set? So we're at a point today where not everything needs to be completely professional. I think social media and the pandemic a lot have broken down the barriers towards things having a little bit more of a DIY aesthetic. You'll see news broadcasters doing interviews with people over Zoom in their bedrooms all the time. But I will say that just, it's really tricky. There are lots of tools that can help you create something on a budget. Go out and Google free design tools, free video tools, free animation tools. Usually, you know, it's free with limitations, but they're out there and they help. I will say that knowing how to use a design tool doesn't necessarily make you a graphic designer. So bad design elements are going to detract from your message, whereas good ones will highlight it. And I highly recommend, if you are the poor person who's, you know, got zero budget and been told go out and make something beautiful, I have a bit of a Google, look for some free online courses in basic theories of graphic design, because they are really going to help you put things together in a way that engages people. All right, the last one to think about is metrics. Just keep it in the back of your mind. What can you follow? Clicks, downloads, likes, page views, how many emails have you sent out, things like that. And you might need to talk to your university or CRE about their website and how they can help you to track things. All right, now the actual communication itself. We're going to talk a little bit about using stories. So why put your message into a story? Well, people remember stories. So Beauty and the Beast was first written down in the 1700s. The research has actually traced its lineage back to 2,500 years, maybe even 4,000 years, for this story of girl marries magical beast. Stories will frame your message and they're going to appeal to your audience's values. So over the years, the messages and social values have definitely changed, but the story of Beauty and the Beast endures. So the message is that you're going to learn to love your husband, and it's worked for millennia as young girls have been herded off to their arranged marriages. The modern update is don't judge on appearance, and that's a little bit more in line with today's values. Still slightly problematic, but the tale persists because we love it. Now, we remember, well, sorry, I'll step back. Stories are going to help transport you into the message. So some research has shown that whether you're looking at a fictional story or a fact, say a case study, you can use imagery and emotion and word choice to help transport people into that story and really engage with it. And the other thing is that we remember stories, not statistics. So the next example is from the book Made to Stick by Dan and Chip Heath. Put it out there. So Dan Heath is a Stanford professor who gave his students a 1-minute speech. They had to talk about, is nonviolent crime a serious problem? Now, 1 in 10 of the students told a story and the others used statistics. At the end of the day, 5% of the audience could recall one of those statistics, but 2/3 remembered the stories. And I think if I asked you in a couple of days, you might not even remember the 2/3. The original story is that it's 63% remember the stories, but that's a little bit of a tough number to remember. So 2/3 you might remember tomorrow. By next week, you'll just remember that stories, not statistics. All right, why else do we use stories? So if you're communicating to a non-expert audience, they're going to help increase engagement, they're going to reduce counter arguments, and they'll make people feel as if the experience being described is their own. And again, that connects to the imagery and the values and emotions in the words. So they've actually done studies where they've popped people into MRIs, scanned their brains while they're telling a story, and then popped other people in an MRI and scanned their brain while they listen to a recording of the story. And those same sort of areas are lighting up as they talk about actions and what's going on with the story. Everyone's mirroring the storyteller. And finally, stories are considered to be more convincing than data alone. So, story structure. It doesn't have to be scary. One of the most simple stories you can get, and you can work this one into like a 30-second pitch, is and, but, therefore. So A plus B, but C, therefore D. And so from one of our examples, we've been focused on improving women's health behaviours during pregnancy and how that impacts their children's outcomes. But new research shows that if you only change your health behaviours during pregnancy, it's just too little too late to really have an impact on children's health outcomes, substantially their incomes. And so therefore what we need are policies and programs that support women's health through their childbearing years. So that's a really simple little pitch. You can change up the values, you can mess with what you do and change it around, but that's your 30-second pitch when you meet someone in the elevator or at a networking event. The other one is the narrative arc. So this is a classic one that we all study in school. You have context. Why should I care? You've got a conflict or a problem that you're going to solve, the findings that make you sort of sit up and go, oh, yeah. And then the closure is going to be the implications or the call to action. So, in our baby food example, why should I care? Depending who you're speaking to, parents care because they just want their kids to eat veggies because they know it's kind of good for them. The problem that we were working on as researchers, or Katrina was rather, not me, was, is breastfeeding a taste bridge to what children are going to learn to love, or is the fact that you're born with a preference for sweet foods and you have to learn to like savory and sour foods? Which one of these competing theories is really going to help us feed veggies to children? The findings are it's the first food that makes the difference, not the breastfeeding. And so the implication for this is, great, we need to change the guidelines, and you've got 75% of children eating rice cereal for their first meal. We need to change that up and get 100% of children to start eating broccoli as their first food. If you're talking to policymakers about why they should change this, okay, context, back we go. Why should I care? Imagine a world where a generation of children grew up loving vegetables. How healthy would they be? How much disease could we prevent if we could make this one small change? All right, we are going to take another breakout and go through the worksheet again. So we're going to look at what are your key messages, what's your call to action, and you might just need to pick one audience and work through, because if you've got multiple audiences, you will have multiple messages and calls to action. And then there was a downloadable, which is the story samples that you can take home. And if you've got time in this sort of section of the workshop, maybe pick one of the short ones, an and, but before, but therefore, or a pitch for the conversation, and see if you can put your project or program into that format.
Adam, are you there?
Oh, you're on
Oh.
mute, Helen.
There we go. And screen 3. I apologize. I have 3 different screens going and multiple things popped up. So I hope everybody found that a really useful section. I know in our group, I don't think we quite got anything onto paper, but we had a go at some and but therefore stories. Does anyone else want to share maybe what they came up with as perhaps their key messages or their values that they're trying to meet? See. Oh, everybody's gotten really shy. Did anyone get as far as writing something down on paper? Seeing some shaking heads. All right, promise me that you'll take it home this afternoon and write your thoughts down before you forget them. Anybody?
We just did a lot of chatting, to be honest, Helen. Sorry.
Okay.
We got nothing down on paper. We had a fantastic discussion about, we talked a lot about the barriers, and it just comes up time and time again that this time is really hard to cut through the noise of information out there with whoever your primary audience is or your audiences are, and how to do that, and it comes back to that understanding the audience and knowing what your goal is, but and I thought I'd just confirm that's your communication goal rather than the goal of the research, because we were talking about that.
Yeah, and I guess you can look at this in terms of what's your overall project goal, the program goal, and then each communication piece should have its own goal, but each communication piece should have its own objective too, and that might change depending on the audience.
Right. Yeah. So the spreadsheet is fantastic for that, because I've used them my whole working life, and I just love them because it's so succinct and logical, and you can go back and tweak and refine. We talked a bit about that too, that it's not a perfect science, and sometimes the key messages, I can spend days on key messages, rewriting, trying to get them right, and then testing. So often we'll road test them, like with Helen's or Cindy, and just say, does this make sense? Check as well. So that was interesting. We really did get stuck around the barriers of language, attention span. So all the things that you really referred to in the talk that are valuable to try and use these skills to cut through, like simplifying the language is not dumbing it down, it's just providing it a different format, and hopefully it'll reach a broader audience. Trying to think what else. I think that was the main thing, but it was interesting, that it's sort of reassuring to know that we're all in it together. We're up against the same barriers. But it's also reassuring to know everyone agreed the and but therefore is just such a nice little concise formula. To be able to apply that to the research would be really interesting and fun to try.
And it's great, description of this and this, but
yeah. And personal stories as well. Merrin was in my group and we were talking a bit about she's used lived experience a bit. But then it was interesting because Merrin works in the nutrition industry, or research, nutrition research. Working with the nutrition industry is very challenging because they think correct me if I'm wrong, Merrin, you come with your lived experience, but they come with what they think is their lived experience, and there's sort of like a disconnect. So trying to find that common ground and communicate is tricky in itself.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of this, it comes down to the more that you can talk ideas through with stakeholders. You don't always have to go to someone, your next users. You don't have to go to them with a fully formed message. It could just be, you're my next user. I've got my eye on these people and I really need help. And that can be enough to start that conversation and really refine your messages. And it might take it in a slightly different direction, but it's so much more worth it than having something fall on completely deaf ears if you get it wrong. So
yeah.
All right, we do have to press on though. So let's get my controls back under order. All right, dissemination. I think this is the bit that a lot of people are really interested in. And I think, you know, all things, take a multi-pronged approach, don't put all your eggs in one basket, you know, not all methods are created equal. It's true. So you need to collaborate with your next users who've got these established communication channels as much as possible. There's no point in recreating the wheel. So the important thing to realize is that, you know, if you do a media pitch, which is what your university or CRE marketing team, if you've got one, are going to jump straight to, because that's usually a marketing team, that's all they do is media. They'll do marketing to students and media. They don't necessarily work in the land of policy briefs and webinars and all these other things that you need to do to get your message out. So your media pitch might get picked up, but it also might not. And if it does get picked up, you've got no guarantee who's going to see it or whether they will get your messaging correct or, you know, take a completely different angle and turn it into a horror story. So what else are you going to do? And I'm going to put a few examples out there because you really need to make sure that you are communicating through as many channels as you possibly can if you're going for the general public. If you're targeting policymakers or a specific organization, fabulous, narrow it down, make that one phone call, talk to that one person. But for the broader public, it's difficult. And so I don't want to dishearten you with these examples, but I want you to have sort of realistic expectations of what different channels of dissemination can achieve for you. So if you get an organization who's willing to put your piece into their newsletter, the average open rate on a newsletter is 30%. So that's 30% of people will see the newsletter. Even less of them are probably going to click on the link to read more and do whatever it is that you want, take your survey or download your tool. So it's really about having that big, broad funnel that gets as many people in at the top as possible. All right, what else do we do? Social media is a wonderful one. Start with Facebook. Don't confuse the number of followers that an account has with the number of people who are going to see your post. I hear a lot of people say, we're just going to put it out on social media. I'm like, which social media? Who's, you know, you don't even have an account. Your group doesn't have an account. Who's listening to you? The Australian Longitudinal Study for Women's Health is one of the projects I work for. Our Facebook account has about 10,000 followers. They are mostly participants from one of our cohorts, and they've been with us for about 10 years since they were largely recruited through Facebook. That's where they came from. Now, out of that 10,000, any post I put up there will average between 350 and maybe on a really good day, 1,000 views. It's more often likely that 1,000 views is going to be some meme about cats that I put up and not our actual research. And so, you know, you can spend hours crafting the perfect infographic and message for 350 people to see it. You know, 5 likes and 2 link shares is good. So it is tough, which means that you need to not just put it out on your social media, you need to put it out on other people's, or better yet, you need to pay for promotion. If you're on social media, you need a budget to make sure that people see it. It doesn't have to be huge, but you won't get seen really without that money. So write that into your grants. Okay, Facebook's not the only one. YouTube, remember I talked about the example of how much or how long people watch videos for on Facebook. YouTube is the place for watching videos. So another example from the CRE WAND, our translation committee partnered with Jean Howes for Women's Health to create and disseminate a series of videos on menopause. The videos are on the Jean Howes YouTube channel, and so from there you can embed it on websites, you can repost it into other social media. I don't know, I mean, how many views do you think a video will get on the CRE WAND website? It's pretty new. It's certainly not turning up on first page of Google if you're searching for stuff about menopause. It's pretty safe to say it got under 100 hits on the video from the CRE WAND. Now, on the other hand, Jean Howes did their thing, which is what they exist to do, which is translate women's health messaging and reach women and doctors. And full disclosure, they did use some paid promotion. I have no idea how much. from their side, the video got over 23,000 views. And so it's the power of having that audience and the connection with them already and be able to piggyback on that. And the paid promotion makes a difference. Okay, we're going to finish with something positive, the conversation. I love the conversation. If you're trying to talk to your policymakers, practitioners, this is, according to the conversation, this is what they're reading. So there's a pitch example in the story PDF of a pitch that I did with one of our researchers. The conversation, it got picked up, so you can see how much it changes from that pitch to the final article. But it's got the why should we care and the other points as well. If you do get into the conversation, you go onto their website, there's a section where you can pitch to them. You can, you know, you're fighting with about easily 200 other odd pitches a day. So if you get through that, you're doing really well. They have fabulous editors who will help to craft your story. So your pitch really just has to focus on why should they care and be catchy, and they will do the rest. The wonderful thing about the conversation is that it's the copyright is Creative Commons, which means that any other organization out there can pick it up and post it across their website. So their stuff tends to go gangbusters if it's really good, and that will really help with distribution. So if you've got a good story, I always recommend pitching the conversation. All right, now finding your next users. This is the bit where everyone sort of goes, ooh, but how are we actually going to find people? You know, if we're not doing a pitch and if we're not talking to the general public, how do we actually get hold of people? So you need to look for direct contacts in an organization. Government departmental organizational charts are a great one. They might not be up to date. They might not actually have a person's name, but it's a head start when you want to ring reception and say, I'm looking for the person who does this. You know, does your organization have a newsletter? They might have an external facing one that you can get in. They might also have an internal facing one. So contact the media and comms team, because their contacts will be on a website, and just talk to them and say, we'd like to talk to your people about this. How do we get that message out, or what can we give you that will help? You know, are these groups on social media? Tag them in posts, send them a direct message, start the conversation. I think, you know, it's really hard, and you know, basically you've just got to sort of, you know, take a deep breath, put on your great big superhero undies on the outside, strike a couple of power poses and pick up the phone. So write a script, practice it, and do it. And to give you a little example, it is really time consuming. So earlier this year, I had a major report that our organization had done that we needed to distribute. I created a summary of the report. So it went from 300 pages to an interactive online summary. And then I spent about 4 days on the phone ringing organizations, especially state government departments, to find out who I needed to send this to, emailing it through and requesting that they put it in their newsletters or share it with people. Was it hard? Yes. Was it worth it? Yes. So in the end, about 800 odd people have read the summary. And I know that because it's a website link that I can track how many people have gone to that page. And then I can track that about 180 have gone on and actually downloaded the report. And so for us, that's great. For you, maybe you need 1,000 people to read something, or maybe you just need that one policymaker to read it and do something about it. So you do just have to pick up the phone there and do the hard work. All right, so in conclusion, if you're addressing the general public, address the why, keep it simple, don't be patronizing, appeal to values, stories, not statistics, people, not numbers. Policymakers, address the why. You really need to understand the political landscape and the background of what they're working on. And sometimes, you know, this isn't out there for the public to see. You just have to pick up the phone and start a relationship and talk to someone. Always have a one-pager with your key messages and your supporting points ready to go, and you will use that over and over again, not just for policymakers, but for, you know, all these steps throughout the research impact cycle. If you're talking to practitioners, one of the big things that I've learned is that you need to know, is your research clinically significant? If you're at the research stage, is it actually worth their effort to make changes to their day and do this? So you really need to address the why. help them to understand putting the risks into context so that they understand it and so that they can help their patients to understand it. And potentially you need to be going through your peak bodies and getting the message and the education out that way. So in the end, I think if you really want to drive impact, start at the beginning with your stakeholder engagement. Once you've got your user groups engaged from the beginning, they're going to have this vested interest in helping you to disseminate or translate research at the end. And that's your pathway all the way through, is to have a conversation with people. You don't necessarily have to have this completed communications piece that you will just hand over. It's about refining it as you go and having people on board that you can piggyback off to reach your final user groups. I don't know if we have time for questions, Helen. I think you've got a little bit to say.
I don't think we do, because the closing session is about to start. So I just want to say thank you so much, Helen. That was absolutely fantastic. And please do contact us at the Prevention Centre if you have any questions, and we'll help put you in touch with Helen or whoever
Absolutely.
that you would need to answer. And can I just encourage everybody to click on the closing session, because we're going to do a really good summary of the day. So thank you all so much for attending.
Thanks.
Bye.